watching the India Development Debate Direct right here on ET Now. It's time to get you a very special guest on the show this evening. The Indian banking system, of course, is a mess at a time when the ever-rising bad loans are threatening to stall growth in profits. A spate of controversies, scams and allegations of clash of interest have raised big questions on the credibility of India's lenders, management and even regulators. How to stem the rot in the Indian banking system? To discuss all of that, we've got none other than former Finance Minister Yashwant Sinha on the India Development Debate. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Sinha, for being with us. I have to start by talking to you about ICICI Bank. How surprised are you with this entire controversy that now plagues ICICI Bank and also its top boss?
I am surprised and not surprised. Given the state of our banks in general and the huge NPAs which have been allowed to accumulate even over the last 4 years, it was quite clear that some of these so-called scams will come to light. It cannot be that you advance lakhs of crores of rupees which turn into bad debt and that everything will be absolutely clean, absolutely above board. It was absolutely unlikely that this would happen, and therefore I am not surprised.
Fair point indeed. You're not surprised, but there are allegations of conflict of interest, and this isn't the first time or first instance where a bank has been drawn into a controversy like that and those charges have been raised. Does this trigger the need for better disclosures and changes to maybe the Companies Act, legislative changes in the Banking Act, which should explicitly explain what conflict of interest perhaps is?
We don't really have a law to define conflict of interest, but it is generally widely understood as meaning that if you have any interest directly or through friends and relatives, then you should recuse yourself from decision making on those issues. This whole ICICI business now is under investigation by the CBI, the Enforcement Directorate, and I believe also the income tax. So I would not like to make any factual comment on this whole issue at this stage, but I would like to say that like Caesar's wife, Kocher's wife also had to be above board, absolutely above board. And if she found out that her husband was involved in any manner with any decision that the bank was taking, then she should have been very careful. And even when other relatives, in our law we have a definition of close relatives, but even where other relatives are involved, one has to be very, very careful. And there is a scope for recusing oneself, that you will not be part of the decision making process and other people will take a decision.
But at that stage, that's exactly the question, sir. Do we need to make changes and legislative changes perhaps in the Companies Act and the Banking Act in the interest of greater transparency?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the understanding that one has about conflict of interest. I think what we need in this country, first of all, is a law passed by Parliament on conflict of interest. What constitutes conflict of interest? And that law should be passed, it should be carefully drafted, and then anyone who transgresses the law will suffer the consequences that the law will prescribe.
Fair point indeed. But talking of investigation, and you refer to investigation and transgressing the law, in hindsight, Mr. Sinha, do you believe the ICICI Bank Board erred in not letting an external inquiry take place and gave its clearance and its clean sheet with just an internal one, looking at documents, looking at what had happened within the organization, did not open itself to an external inquiry?
No, why only the board? I heard a former chairman of the bank, ICICI Bank, in an interview over a TV channel giving a clean sheet to Mrs. Kocher. So there have been people who firmly believe that she is not in the wrong and are articulating that opinion. As far as the board is concerned, the board hastened with its observations. Now that the whole matter is under investigation by government agencies, I think the board, others concerned, the media, everyone should wait for the findings of these agencies which are looking into this matter.
But Mr. Sinha, this entire controversy, and what does this controversy say about whistleblower complaints? It's now out in the public domain that the first whistleblower complaint came way back in 2016, and it did not just go to the banking regulator, the RBI, it went to the market regulator, SEBI, it went to the government, and even to the Prime Minister's office. The question is, why did it find no favor? Why did nobody pay heed to it?
They should have found favor. They should not have been kept pending for 2 years. They should have been acted upon immediately. And, if an inquiry had been held as a result of the whistleblower complaint, then we would not have seen the present situation, which is causing embarrassment to all concerned. So the whistleblower complaint or any complaint, I am aware of the fact, Supriya, that in government there are rules which have been framed about which complaint should be acted upon. And even if it is an anonymous complaint and there are some facts mentioned in that complaint, then those facts should be verified and one should proceed further. But if it's a signed complaint, then it should not be ignored at all, and it should be acted upon. So only those in government or RBI will be able to explain why these complaints remained pending and they were not acted upon.
Okay, but while you're talking about the RBI, I think it's only fair that I ask you that what should the role of the regulator be at this stage? Given the fact that RBI very recently, about 10 days back, said that it has greater control and authority over private sector banks and not so much over public sector lenders. So what exactly should the role of the regulator be at this stage to ensure that, confidence isn't eroded, to ensure there's greater certainty? I'm just trying to ask you, what do you expect the RBI to do at this stage as far as ICICI Bank is concerned?
I perhaps told you on an earlier interview that I don't buy the theory that RBI needs more powers to even control the public sector banks. But that falls absolutely flat, that argument, when you look at ICICI, which is a private bank. So if it's a private bank, then why and what more powers does the RBI need to find out whether they were in the right or in the wrong? RBI as regulator has not discharged its functions fully and adequately. And that's why we are looking at the banking sector with such a grim attitude that there's so many things which are wrong with our banking sector today.
Okay, fair point indeed. But, I'm not going to get into the bashing of the regulator at this stage because there's also banks that need to do their own job. But what does a controversy like this do to investor confidence? At least in the case of PNB, where the Nirav Modi scam had happened, and that was obviously a bigger magnitude and all of that, there was assurance at the end of the day that there was government backing and money will not sink. There's already been a run on ICICI Bank way back in 2003, 2008. I'm just wondering how much of investor confidence can be eroded?
No, you are absolutely right in saying that trust is the basis of banking. And, nothing should happen in order to make people lose that trust. Because if the trust is gone, then nothing is left of banking. So therefore, the banks themselves, the boards of the banks, the RBI as the regulator, the government of the day, they have the SEBI, other agencies, they have their, prescribed responsibilities to discharge, and they must be discharged fully and faithfully. If that does not happen, then there will be a problem. I mean, for instance, and I'm digressing a little, Supriya, government was claiming that they have not waived off the loans of Indian corporates. But just a couple of days ago, they replied to a parliament question in the Rajya Sabha perhaps, in which the government has admitted on record that 2014-15 till September last year, they had written off 2,41,000 crore rupees. The banks have written off this debt, 2,41,000. It's not a small amount. And they have not disclosed the names of companies, corporates or individuals who have been beneficiaries of this write-off. So, then this also raises an issue of trust. You say one thing today, another thing tomorrow, and that is not good for trust. What we need, therefore, is a complete cleaning up exercise. The government and the RBI should get together and should cogitate about steps which are needed to clean up the banking sector, the private banks, the cooperative banks, the public sector banks, the foreign banks. The entire system needs to be cleaned up, and we perhaps need some kind of a forensic audit to be conducted on all banks so that we are clear about where we stand today.
Mr. Sinha, talking about forensic audit, I will go back to what the government has done, and many people believe this is the knee-jerk reaction and maybe a collateral damage could occur on account of this. The Nirav Modi scam happened, and then the government said, let's do a forensic audit of every NP account worth 50 crore rupees. Let's get passport details, and all kinds of witch hunting is perhaps being risked at this stage. Given the kind of reactions that we are seeing from the government, the regulator and all of that, LOUs as a lending institution are completely cancelled. What sort of a collateral damage could this really have? I mean, we've hardly seen credit offtake. Fresh investment is not breaking ground. I'm just trying to assess the collateral damage on account of all of this.
The collateral damage will be far more severe than you and I are imagining at this stage. Huge accumulation of NPAs have already led to a situation where the banks are discouraged from fresh lending, isn't it? And that's why investment in our economy, especially private investment, is at such a low level. And there will be no economic growth if there is no private sector investment. And there will be no private sector investment if the banks don't lend. So this is the whole cycle which has been disrupted already. And it will be further disrupted if we have scams of this kind coming out, large frauds being detected, not merely 20 crore, 50 crore, but a few hundred crore. There are various banks which are now reporting such frauds. So the situation is bad. It is grim. And we need a series of steps in order to re-establish trust and encourage the banks to play their role. If that does not happen, then as you were saying, it will result in long-term collateral damage.
I'm just saying one of the collateral damages that I at least assess from where I sit is that the whole narrative of privatization of public sector banks is suddenly out of the window. It's taken a back seat, it's on the back burner because people are now pointing out to fault lines and issues that continue to plague India's private sector lenders as well. Do you see that as a collateral damage, the privatization of PSBs out of public narrative?
I made this point earlier also, that ownership of the bank hardly matters. And the most important example of that is the kind of financial collapse that we saw in the US in terms of banking and in insurance companies in 2008. So ownership of the bank is not the most important thing. There are voices which are being raised that public sector banks should be privatized. I am not saying it should not happen. It should happen slowly. You have to prepare public opinion in order to be able to do that. You will recall that I had myself, when I was Finance Minister, introduced a bill in Parliament to reduce government's holding to 33% in public sector banks, and that never saw the light of the day because the Parliament and the people were not prepared for such kind of a step. And that is now, what, 16 years, 17 years down the line, we are grappling with the same issue. So there also, we need to think coolly and take steps which will improve the functioning of banks.
Mr. Sinha, a very candid question. You began by saying that, all of these controversies are coming to fore because of the mounting NPAs that one is seeing in India's banking sector. As the cleansing gets deeper, should we expect more skeletons to tumble out, or do you really believe that the worst is behind India's largest lenders, both public and private?
I am not sure that the worst is over. If this kind of investigation is carried out, forensic audit is carried out, then I'm sure many more skeletons will tumble out of the closet. Whether they'll be as large as Nirav Modi or larger or smaller, that depends. But we had, unfortunately for many years now, we have had a situation which allowed people to take liberty with other people's money, which is what is deposited in banks. Bank boards, bank officials, other people who were going to the bank to borrow, all of them have colluded to create this situation.
Okay, I'm going to take a break away from the controversies that plague India's public and private sector banks and talk to you about macroeconomy. Oil prices have been on the rise. Retail fuel is at a 4-year high, and there have been obviously many voices of concern that why should we be paying higher fuel bills when actually crude is lower than what it was when the government had resumed office. But that apart, there is an RBI policy slotted for tomorrow. What's your expectations? Because there are two views out there. One view is oil is rising, inflation management should be the prime focus of the RBI, and that will entail status quo or perhaps even higher rates. And the other point of view is that low investments have been a big function of high rates, and those need to come down, or there needs to be a more benign commentary.
Yeah, rate is a very important issue, and I don't agree with those theorists who say that rate is inconsequential and that investment depends on other factors. Investment depends on the rate of interest also. And as far as the RBI is concerned, they are faced with a difficult situation because, as you said, international crude oil prices are going up. We have just touched the highest ever price of diesel. Petrol is at a very elevated level, and therefore all this is adding to the burden of inflation. So in this situation, I don't see any scope for RBI to interfere with the rates. Going forward, I don't know. It will depend on the situation as it develops, but the options before the RBI will be limited as long as we say that it's RBI's primary responsibility to control inflation. I don't buy that theory completely because I feel that unless you have monetary and fiscal policy working in tandem, you will not be able to control inflation. And we have seen in the past, during the UPA years, how RBI went on raising rates 13 times, which completely dried up all investment and led to a decline in growth rate.
Mr. Sinha, I can't have you and not ask you the politically sensitive questions. And there has been so much debate and controversy on the fake news guidelines which were issued by the INB minister, later overturned by the intervention of the Prime Minister. It was an obvious breach of media freedom and an obvious thrust on free press. But do you believe it was possible without the PM's knowledge? And doesn't it set a very dangerous precedence? Could these norms have been floated without the Prime Minister knowing about these?
As Arun Shourie said yesterday in some TV interview, that a Prime Minister who knows who Manmohan Singh is hobnobbing with in Pakistan and what the former army chief is doing, for the Prime Minister to be unaware of the development in the Information Broadcasting Ministry is something that I personally will not buy. And therefore, I was a little surprised when I found out that people were giving full credit to the Prime Minister, saying that he's the one who has put Smriti Irani, the Information Minister, in her place and force her to take back her circular. This circular could not have been issued without the express sanction of the Prime Minister.
Okay, forget about who put out the circular and then whose intervention got it clammed, but the circular itself, doesn't it set a dangerous precedence?
It does. It does. There are many dangerous things which are happening in our polity today. Supriya, I am very sorry to be saying this. And it is unprecedented, isn't it? Unprecedented that senior most judges of the Supreme Court of India should come forward and publicly state their difference of opinion, not only with their own chief, but also with the government of the day. This is absolutely bizarre, and it's something which should be corrected absolutely immediately if we want democracy to be preserved in this country.
Okay, talking about democracy, I must draw your attention and ask you to react on a very, very serious allegation, and these allegations and charges have been traded by both sides of the political spectrum, and that's on data manipulation electoral processes. These are very grave charges. If in fact they were used, it does undermine the electoral process. It undermines a very thriving democracy, does it not?
I'm very glad that you've asked me this question. I read somewhere that people believe that data is the new oil. You know, it gives you the kind of strength which is unprecedented, something which has not been known in our history. So without going into the merit of the charges and the counter charges which are being traded between political parties or among political parties, I would like to say that we should have a court-monitored inquiry into what has happened with regard to data leaks in our country. Whoever is responsible must be brought to book, and we must as soon as possible, have a law, even through an ordinance, about data protection, which we don't have at the moment. So I am not impressed by the arguments, the counter allegations. We are missing the whole point of this debate. The whole point of this debate is a law for the protection of data and an investigation into who has leaked which data and who has Supriya permitted multinational companies to come in and collect that data in India. I mean, millions of people's data has been collected. One doesn't know what use is being made. It is horrendous. I mean, one can't imagine the misuse to which it can be subjected to if we are not immediately able to put a control on it.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there, but just to talk about pure polity, and that has to do with the bipole results that came in from Gorakhpur and Phulpur and Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, and that suddenly seems to have galvanized an anti-Modi and anti-BJP bloc, and there is this united opposition willing to take on this ruthless political machinery of Amit Shah and Narendra Modi in 2019. But the question is, can they stay together, given the fact that they've got very, very varying political ideologies? There is rampant political opportunism on that part of the political spectrum. I'm just trying to understand, they've all come together to be anti-Modi, but can they stick together?
No, that is a question for the future. If we are convinced that democracy in this country is threatened by whoever and in whatever way, if democracy is threatened, then we have to forget everything else and just engage ourselves in the task of preservation of democracy as it happened in 1977. And you know, people will learn from history, they will learn from experiences. I hope the next experiment will be more fruitful than the earlier one. But even if that experiment collapses, I am firmly of the view that people of this country have to come together to see that every step which is threatening democracy is nipped in the bud, and that this democracy, which gives people their rights, is preserved not only for the time being, for all times to come.
All right, so before we let you go, a final question then. There's been so much debate and an enraging discussion and a lot of violence perhaps also on the review of the SC/ST Anti-Atrocities Act. Every political party obviously wants to be seen by backing the Dalits, by being on their side. The Supreme Court meanwhile asserts a review is warranted of this act. What's your own opinion? Is the time right and ripe for this review, or do you believe this is going to indeed dilute the protection that the SC/STs have got so far?
No, this is a highly sensitive issue, and like other highly sensitive issues, it's very difficult to, or it's not difficult at all to take a wrong step. Now, all the facts in this case are not clear. I saw the observation of the Supreme Court which says that, like in other laws, we are only trying to prevent its misuse, but somehow it has created a fear in the minds of the weaker sections that it interferes with the law and takes away the protection that is provided to them. Fortunately, a review petition has been filed now. Let the Supreme Court take up the review petition as soon as possible, and looking at all aspects of the law and the practice of the law, give a judgment which will protect the rights of the weaker sections and also protect the citizens' rights. This is the equilibrium that we need to establish so that no side is hurt in the process.
All right. On that note, sir, thanks very much for joining us. Mr. Yashwant Sinha, India's former finance minister, a very candid-speaking politician there. And we've shared a broad host of spectrum ideas here, whether it's ICICI Bank, whether it's banking in general, and of course, the SC/ST Act and politics of the day. Thanks very much, Mr. Sinha, for sparing time and being with us. We've got to slip into a quick breather, but there's plenty of programming right up here on ET Now.